Welcome to Islamophobia for Dummies, the step-by-step guide to seeing how ridiculous Islamophobia really is.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. With the recent death of Osama bin Laden, in this episode we'll be discussing the relationships between Osama bin Laden, the terrorist acts of 9/11, and the religion of Islam. First of all, Islam is fundamentally opposed to harming civilians. The Quran states, "Whoever kills a human being for other than manslaughter or corruption in the earth, it shall be as if he had killed all mankind." In addition, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, "Do not kill an old man, nor a child, nor a youth, nor a woman." This hadith prohibited harming civilians even on the battlefield, let alone outside the context of battle. Sheikh Hamza Yusuf Hansen explains this hadith further.
At essence, Islam is an Iranic religion. It is a peaceful tradition. Our Prophet was not a warmonger. He did not like war. He disdained war. He said, never hope to meet your enemies, but if you're forced to meet them, be brave in the battlefield. He prohibited the killing of civilians. He prohibited the killing of women and children. In the Maliki fiqh that I studied, the only time that you can fight a woman if she's a combatant on the other side. The Maliki jurists were so troubled by the hadith that they said, if you see a woman on the battlefield, run away from her. Because they did not want you to fall under that hadith, because it's a mutawatir hadith, it's a factual hadith that has the same strength as a verse in the Quran.
Harming civilians clearly violates the explicit commands of both the Quran and Prophet Muhammad himself. And this is the consensus of the qualified Islamic scholars from the four Islamic schools of thought.
One of the greatest problems we have is we have what I call Sheikh Googles, weekend muftis. We have now a loss of authority in our tradition. This has led to people like what they call Sheikh bin Laden. Somebody called me up on a recent Arabic program and said, what do you think of Sheikh Osama bin Laden? But who made him a sheikh? Really, who made Sheikh Osama bin Laden a sheikh? Osama bin Laden is an accountant. Ayman Zawahiri was a pediatric surgeon. And these people are giving fatwa from caves in Afghanistan telling people to kill people.
In other words, even though bin Laden may be qualified as an accountant, he lacks the Islamic chain of authority needed to qualify him to even give accounting fatwas, let alone on any other subject. So let's make a quick analogy to demonstrate how you can't blame Islam for the ideas of an unqualified person. The Christian Church considers its popes to be infallible, perfect, and unable of making a mistake. And despite the fact that 6 different popes had declared crusades in their infallible opinions, you still can't blame the Christian religion. You could blame the popes themselves who declared a crusade, and you could even blame the Christian Church that decided they were infallible. But you can't blame the teachings of the Messiah Jesus. Now, had these crusades been declared by Christian accountants, it would make even less sense to blame Christianity, just like it makes very little sense to blame Islam for the ideas of bin Laden the accountant. The real irony is that bin Laden is more a product of the US government than anything else. After all, it was the CIA that initially trained, financed, and armed bin Laden and the freedom fighters against the Soviets in Afghanistan. Putting aside bin Laden for a minute, there are still some unanswered questions about the events of 9/11. Pilots for 9/11 Truth want to know how a bunch of guys who mastered playing on the jungle gym were able to fly expert maneuvers that would be nearly impossible for master pilots. Military officers for 9/11 Truth want to know, how is it possible for the world's most advanced Air Force to fail in intercepting all 4 of the hijacked planes? How is it possible that in the most secure building on Earth, not a single one of the Pentagon's external cameras was able to record the aircraft that supposedly crashed into it? How is it possible that before 9/11, not a single steel-framed tower collapsed from even extreme fires for up to 20 hours, but the World Trade Center 7 building supposedly fell in just a few hours from mild fires? Architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth also want to know, how is it possible for the 2 World Trade Center towers to collapse at nearly the speed of gravity, despite the tremendous resistance of the floors below? They also want to know why the World Trade Center collapses behave and look more like demolitions and explosions. But these questions are irrelevant to the US government, as Barack Obama explained.
I'm aware that there's still some who would question or even justify the offense of 9/11. But let us be clear. Al-Qaeda killed nearly 3,000 people on that day, claimed credit for the attack.
But the biggest problem with the so-called admission tape is that the Pentagon mistranslates several key statements, including several parts of the audio that are not even audible. And other than being happy about that tragic loss of life, bin Laden does little more than describe what anyone could have seen and heard on the news. The fact is that bin Laden explicitly denied involvement in the 9/11 attacks numerous times.
But here's what bin Laden himself said 5 days, and then was that 17 days after 9/11. He said, "I stress that I have not carried out this act, which appears to have been carried out by individuals with their own motivation." Then on the 28th of September, just 17 days after 9/11, I have already said I am not involved in the 11 September attacks in the United States. As a Muslim, I try my best to avoid telling a lie. Now, I'm not saying he's a good man, but I'm just saying, let's give him a chance, okay? And see, why do we all think that he's responsible? Did you know that he denied this? See, what happened was the U.S. administration urged American media not to broadcast these words because they're saying perhaps he's giving signals to the cells of terrorists that are still in the United States, which is possible. Yeah. But as you actually look what he says, he is denying that he was involved. And this is after the release of the so-called confession tape. He says again, the United States now has attacked Afghanistan and killed many people. They are innocent, but on a mere suspicion, the United States has launched this fierce campaign. We have witnessed the true crimes of those who call themselves... should I not give this guy a chance to speak? I think I should. Okay. We have witnessed the true crimes of those who call themselves humanitarians and claim to be defenders of freedom. Certainly not for these people who died. What happened then is that bin Laden was convicted on TV. The question is, what other suspects were even investigated? The evidence from the crime scene, as we've seen, was destroyed as the steel beams were cut up and shipped quickly away. The dust was declared safe. Surveillance videos and flight recorders have been seized and not released to the public. I'm talking here about the surveillance videos at the Pentagon in particular. They released 5 frames, which don't show a jet going into the Pentagon at all. It's very suspicious.
The reality is, the FBI never even indicted bin Laden in connection to 9/11. Could bin Laden's 3 denials and the lack of evidence against him explain why the US government decided to assassinate him rather than capture the 54-year-old unarmed bin Laden for trial and real justice? But do we really need to prove that the US government has lied about bin Laden before?
Oh, the reason I keep insisting that there was a relationship between Iraq and Saddam and Al-Qaeda, because there was a relationship between Iraq and Al-Qaeda.
The truth was, there was never a connection between Iraq and Osama bin Laden. There were no weapons of mass destruction either.
And do we also need to prove that the U.S. government has lied about bin Laden's motivations?
Based on what bin Laden himself has said, and for those who read the book will find out that Mr. Clinton, Mr. Bush, and Mr. Obama have been lying to us. Each president has lied to the American people about what the war is about. They keep telling us we're hated because we have democracy. If they did, sir, we would not have a problem. They wouldn't even be a lethal nuisance. They hate us because of our foreign policy. That's why.
And do we really need to prove that the FBI itself has actually supplied the explosives to the terrorists who tried to blow up the World Trade Center in 1993?
FBI agents might have been able to prevent last February's deadly explosion at New York's World Trade Center. They discussed secretly substituting harmless powder for the explosives, but they didn't, according to the FBI's own informant, Imad Salem. Unbeknownst to the FBI at the time, Salem recorded many of his conversations with his handlers.
So while Muslims condemn U.S. foreign policy in supporting Israel and Arab dictators, Islam also condemns the 1998 embassy bombings in Eastern Africa, for which the FBI did indict bin Laden and for which he should have faced trial, because Islam not only prohibits killing civilians, but also the official emissaries from other countries. And while Americans are celebrating the death of Osama bin Laden as justice, where's the justice for the hundreds of thousands of dead Iraqi and Afghani civilians killed as collateral damage in these unjust wars? Other Americans celebrated by spray painting Osama today, Islam tomorrow on a mosque. But despite the facts about Islamic teachings being peaceful, how can we reason with bigots who can't even spell the word tomorrow correctly? And the Western media knows so little about Islam that they think dumping a corpse in the ocean is somehow considered a proper Islamic burial?
And before the end of the day, his remains were aboard the U.S. aircraft carrier Carl Vinson, where U.S. officials say he was given a proper Muslim burial at sea.
So with no such thing as a Muslim burial at sea, Fox News is upset because they think bin Laden was buried respectfully.
Do you think we might have been better off saving the body of bin Laden and not worry about sensitivity?
My question, why? Why treat this terrorist who killed thousands with anything like respect?
And unfortunately for the whole world, this prejudice against Muslims really did start after the events of 9/11.
This crusade, this war on terrorism, is going to take a while.
But it really didn't have to. The U.S. government could have easily avoided this long crusade by sending in their Navy SEALs 10 years ago. Or better yet, the U.S. could have accepted the Afghani government's request that they were ready for the trial of Osama bin Laden in light of the evidence. And this was a very reasonable request, especially since the Afghani government didn't even have an extradition treaty with the United States. On a final note, this last clip from NBC exemplifies how the Western media, rather than holding the U.S. government accountable for its own actions, would rather blame bin Laden for the U.S. government's actions.
Osama bin Laden is dead. The man who killed thousands of innocent people, the man who launched the United States into 2 wars in the name of that attack, the man who changed the way we have to live in this country.
Now, I always thought it was George Bush and the U.S. Congress who changed the way Americans have to live and, quote, launched the U.S. into 2 wars in the name of that attack. I never realized that Osama bin Laden was secretly appointed as both the American president and its U.S. Congress. In conclusion, Islam clearly condemns the killing of any civilian, and prejudice against Muslims won't address any problem whatsoever. And whether bin Laden had anything to do with 9/11 or not, his true inspiration was not Islam, rather, his motivation was U.S. foreign policy.
We sincerely